Hello, this is Chris Kukulski, Billings City Administrator, and Chief St. John, Police Chief, and Chief Rash of the Fire Department. The three of us are going to go through the presentation on the Public Safety Levy. So I'll just kind of dive in. First up, there are 5 different strategies we're working on to improve Billings. Towards the top of that list is safety, and that's really what the focus of this discussion is on safety in Billings, and specifically how we're dealing with ultimately too much crime, as crime rates will show here in a few minutes have more than doubled over the past decade. It's also taking us too long to get to too many areas of the city on our fire responses. But most of the discussion for the Public Safety Levy for this year in 2020 revolves around the fact that our expenditures exceed our revenues by about $4.7 million. So this year there will be a special mail-in ballot, city-only question. The ballots are due September the 15th, and the one question is asking voters if they will consider repealing the 2004 Public Safety Levy and replacing it with a 2020 levy. So back in 2004, voters approved $8.2 million. That's a capped revenue number. So every year the city levies that 8.2 or collects that 8.2, and those dollars unfortunately just don't go as far in 2020 as they did back in 04. Back in 04, the estimate was it was going to take 60 mills to generate that 8.2 million. Today, we're levying 40 mills. So as the city has grown, the 8.2 gets spread amongst a larger tax base, and everyone pays a little less each year. Unfortunately, though, the negative effect on that is its purchasing power goes down, and it doesn't stretch as far for police, fire, and related expenses. So if voters are inclined, they're being asked to replace it with 60 mills. A mill will grow with the tax base if our tax base grows. So with that, we're really focused because of COVID-19, because of the tough economic times that many in our community are experiencing. We are just trying to retain kind of status quo and not slide backwards. That's why this levy is being discussed versus full-on strategies to reduce crime, expand fire station capacity, et cetera. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chief St. John to cover some of the law enforcement components. He's going to turn it over to Chief Rash to talk fire, and then we'll talk finance a little bit before we wrap up. So Chief St. John.
Thank you, Chris. Rich St. John, the police chief here in Billings. This slide here represents the population as it has grown incrementally over the years in relation to our calls for service. We are responsible for providing enforcement services for local, state, and federal charges for 110,000 population approximately, and about 44 square miles. So a lot of people and a lot of area to cover. And you can see from our calls of service going back to about 2013, when methamphetamine really hit our community, those calls continue to go up. What's significant about 2018 and 19 and the subsequent slides is that we have been fully staffed for 2 years, and it's allowed us to do some very creative and proactive things to help turn the tide downward on a couple of these issues, violent crime being one of them. You can see in this slide here that we have had some significant increases in violent crime, and of late we've had a significant number here, some related to COVID, some not, but you can see it flattened out in 18 and 19, and that is indicative of the work we've been able to do being fully staffed. Same holds true for property crimes. You can see significant increases in the earlier years, and then it has been driven down and is now flat. And I attribute that to being able to staff proactive units to address this directly. This is a peer city comparison on violent crime. And you can see Pueblo, Colorado is off the charts. We did talked to their city manager. He indicated that marijuana, specifically recreational, was their problem. But we come in second place compared to other communities there, and we certainly don't want to have that ranking on violent crime and the similar ranking with property crimes. So our goal is to be able to address these issues, drive those numbers down.
So Chief Rash, can we talk fire for a couple minutes?
Certainly. Bill Rash, Billings Fire Chief. Some of our problems that we're running in the fire department, as you can see in the slide, is the fire department response times are nearly twice the national standard. That's unacceptable when it comes to life safety emergencies. Secondly, we have an increasing number of calls, which become more diverse by the day, depending, based on our society. Our fire department calls for service, as you can see on the slide, have risen to over 17,000 calls this year, and we are anticipating over 18,000 calls for our calendar year 2021 or 20. This slide actually depicts on the red dots, that indicates where all of our 7 fire stations are located within the city of Billings. Please note that the fire stations they're located within areas that are dark blue. The dark blue represents a 4-minute travel time to the areas, homes and businesses located within that dark blue area. The light blue area is an 8-minute response time to get to those areas. Now that looks good if considering all of the fire stations, if all of the trucks and personnel are within the fire stations, that's not that bad, other than a few gaps you see that we need to address in the future, being in the southwest portion of the city, as well as up in the Heights area. However, all it takes is one call or a structure fire, which requires 4 engines and a truck company and a battalion chief, that to quickly create a domino effect, which significantly increases our response times to other areas of the city that need assistance.
Kind of coming back to the financial part, as I mentioned earlier, because of COVID-19, the strategies that we were putting forward to add fire stations, add significant personnel to the police department, prosecution, courts, all that has been moved into the future. This year, we're trying to deal with this financial challenge. This is a picture of what it looks like in 2018 when our expenditures on operations started to exceed our revenue, which is the green screen below. I'm going to come back to this after discussing how did we get here. So I mentioned that back in '04, which is kind of at the heart of this repeal and replace question on the ballot, back in '04, the voters approved the revenue cap of 8.2. Between 2004 and 2020, that's lost about 50% of its purchasing power. So we're just able to employ fewer individuals in police and fire through that levy. So we're trying to replace that. The other significant hit we took in 2018 is the city stopped collecting a franchise fee. So there was a small fee charged to every utility user, water and wastewater user and solid waste user in the city, and that money generated $2.53 million, which helped fund police and fire. We eliminated that fee in '18, kind of tied to some other issues, including litigation. So we cut our revenue while at the same time in trying to be more effective in dealing with crime and response times. We've added 20 individuals to the police department, fire department, and dispatch without additional revenue coming in. So as those costs now we have on payroll, and as the chief said, we've been fully staffed now for the better part of 2 years. We typically would have had a pretty significant vacancy savings when police officers were between training, retirements, things of that nature. The chief has done an excellent job filling those slots. We don't want vacancy savings. Without that vacancy savings, then we're seeing those dollars be spent to help reduce crime. Those combined resulted in this graph where operational expenses are about $5 million more than revenues. Now this year we do have or at the end of the 2020 fiscal year, that was adjusted by the CARES Act. So the federal government did graciously share with us so far right around $6 million, which is why the blue graph shows a one-time revenue that came in, solved that problem for 1 year, but we're right back at it if this levy is not successful. So, so what's the impact or what's the cost of this to the typical resident? So this is the median valued home in Billings. It's got a $211,000 taxable value. Typically that's not what you'd sell your home for, but that's what it's taxed at. Half the houses in town have a higher value and half the homes have a lesser value. So that middle home would pay $4.75 more a month if they say yes. If voters say no, we'll retain that 04 levy and it'll just continue to go down a little bit per home annually. So just again, kind of as we wrap up the presentation, a reminder, this is an educational session on making sure voters in Billings know September 15th is this special election. Ballots have to be received by Tuesday the 15th. The question on the ballot is, do voters want to repeal the 04 levy and replace it with the 60 mill levy? Thus, the net effect is adding about $4 million of additional investment for police and fire to help us deal with that budget gap that we have, or do they want to stick with the 04 levy? And then we are talking about the fact that the reality is we will need to be back in the future talking about those additional fire stations, additional officers, prosecutors, dispatchers, et cetera, for us to get our crime rates and our response times in the lower quadrant of our competitors. And my goal there, the reason I'm adamant that that needs to be a focus for us is I believe firmly that families who choose to remain in Billings, families who come back to Montana, or those who choose to relocate here, safety is one of their paramount concerns. Our community has to be in that lower quadrant where they're not even thinking about or needing to worry about safety, similar to confidence and support for the public school system. So with that, I'll kind of wrap this up. Really appreciate your time. If you have any questions, if you'd like to see this presentation, this video clip run more, as well as just kind of education material, you can go to billingsmt.gov on the city's homepage. Scrolling there is the public safety levy information for you. So with that, we thank you for your time. Thanks, Chiefs, for the information. Have a great day.